All right. So, hello everyone. Happy whatever day you are watching this on. I hope and pray that all of you are, again, still hanging in there. Not many folks, at least at the time of me recording this, not many folks have had too many questions, comments, or concerns. So that's good. But nevertheless, if one does come up, please reach out, let me know, and I'll try to address those as soon as I can. Hopefully, all the quizzes went well, and the thought papers went well so far. So we're going to jump right into Chapter 15. So, second to last one. Here we go. Where did you go? Here you are. All right. Okay. So, what's next? So thought paper number 4 is due April 16th, right? So that's the new date based on the syllabus days or dates, right, in the syllabus based on, obviously, our current predicament. Today, as in Tuesday, right, so chapter 15, you should send in your career day sources and email. So that's due, quote unquote, today, as in the syllabus day. Of course, you can watch this whenever you want, but nevertheless, be checking the syllabus for when stuff is due. And then quiz number 5, April 21st. Then you got the paper, and then you are done. So, Chapter 15, we got single-parent families, remarried, and stepfamilies, just like our other chapters. We've chatted about this from the get-go, right? So, certain chapters are dedicated to certain, types of families, how we understand certain families, although we've been chatting about them from the beginning, right? Because we made it a point at the very first chapter to say that, families can be a lot of different things. So throughout all of these different chapters on love and affection, we have to understand it through various types of families. But nevertheless, today we're going to be focusing on these. So, if you are in a single-parent family or you are getting remarried, you obviously have to start over, right? Start over to a certain extent. So if you are getting remarried, you have to get back into the dating game, right? And that can be scary for a lot of folks. That can be really difficult based on, maybe you're, 52 years old and you're trying to get back into the dating game. Well, that might be tough for various reasons. Maybe there's not as many people dating. Your just geographical location. You haven't dated somebody in 20 years, right? So you don't know really what to do. For many folks, after 1 year of divorce, right, they start to meet new dating partners. Now, of course, this can vary, right? So many folks, kind of pick things back up earlier than 1 year after a divorce. Some take longer, right? So, but 1 year is the usual average. For adults, right, specifically adults who have been divorced, oftentimes they have a job, right? They have a car, they have a place to live. So the most satisfying thing in their life that they feel they are missing is some kind of romantic relationship. Right, and many of you, even at this age, probably understand this, right? Like, oh yeah, I'm in school, I'm working, but, man, like, I kind of want a significant other, right? A partner to just kind of do life with, right? It's a very satisfying, big part of many people's lives, especially for somebody who's gone through a divorce. Mothers are often slow to restart. Why might this be? And notice how I said not just women, but mothers, right? So why might mothers be slow to restart? If you're thinking about, because they're a mother, as in they have a kid, you're spot on, right? If a mom of 2 kids has been divorced and she's trying to get back into the dating game, well, not only is she having to think about all of the aspects around dating, but she's got to be thinking about, man, I got 2 kids also. right? Not that kids are baggage, but it can be tough, going on a first date with somebody and saying, yeah, I already have 2 kids, right? And how do they, how does this potential partner factor in? Then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, your age might be a factor as well. Young divorcees are usually more optimistic because they're young, right? When you are, say, 28 and for some reason you are divorced at 28, right, for whatever reason, you're thinking, man, yeah, I'm 28 years old. I got this, right? I got my whole life ahead of me, yada, yada, yada. If you're 55, you may be thinking, oof, I'm 55. A lot of folks out there when I'm 55 years old, right? Like my dating pool's a little smaller, right? Because people at 55, and what we learned in the past is that the older you get without being married, the more likely you are to be single. So that's another reason for being less optimistic. Oh. Now we've talked about cohabitation as well, right? So if you are starting over, right, this idea of cohabitating may play in. Oftentimes we think about cohabitation in regards to before you're married, right? Like, do I live with my boyfriend of 4 years, although we're not engaged, although we're not married, right? That's how we usually think about cohabitation. But half of remarriages have some form of cohabitation present. That should make total sense, right? Excuse me. It's more common after divorce than before the first marriage, and it's more likely than remarriage, right? But why are all these things actually way more common than we may think? If cohabitation occurs in half of remarriages, that tells us that when folks get divorced, I don't want to say they're lonely, but if you've gotten divorced after a 15-year-long marriage, then for 15 years you were used to having somebody else around. You were used to living with somebody. And then all of a sudden you're divorced and maybe you're by yourself, maybe you're with your kids, but your kids aren't the same as having a partner, right? So maybe you are more likely to cohabitate in order to kind of get back to that normal, space you are in regards to having somebody around that you live with. So again, that makes sense for more common after divorce. However, maybe more likely than remarriage, because again, think about it. If you've just been divorced, are you really trying to rush back into another marriage? Maybe. I know some folks do, but for a lot of folks, right, they're a little more cautious the second time around. And maybe they cohabitate to test the waters of like, okay, I just got divorced. I don't want to do that whole divorce thing again. How is this really going to work? So therefore, there may be some more instability if they become married. And then white women are more likely to cohabitate. Not exactly sure why. And if you have fewer children, you're more likely to cohabitate. That should make sense. Right? If you are a young single woman with no kids, and you start dating a guy who has 7 children, right? You may not be likely to cohabitate with that person, because that means you almost, in a sense, take on the responsibility of having those 7 children. So beyond just cohabitating, for remarriage itself, it's higher for men than it is for women. 52% of divorced men marry versus 44% of divorced women. Most likely for wealthy, college-educated men with no kids. Why? Why might this be? Again, really focus on this descriptor right here. If you are a young woman at a bar or whatever, and you start to chat some guy up, and you're like, oh hey, he's super cute. Ooh, I like this guy, like he's really nice. And then you find out he's wealthy, he's college educated, he has no kids, and like you two are hitting it off. But then he tells you got divorced. You're like, well, he checks every other box off. right? Why shouldn't I? Right? Yeah, he got divorced, it didn't work, right? You are more likely to give this guy the benefit of the doubt because he doesn't have any kids to bring along. Maybe you love kids, that's fine, but still, he's got no kids. He's wealthy and he's college educated. You are more likely to give that guy the benefit of the doubt in regards to divorce than the guy who's not wealthy, not college educated, and has 3 kids. And so that makes sense for 52% of divorced men marry versus 44% of divorced women. When men are divorced, we've studied in past chapters that they often fare better because they often are the ones that have jobs. So when they're divorced, they still have their income. And that income usually allows them to do many other things that women without an income and divorced are not able to do. Women over 25 are less likely to remarry. Why might this be? Right? Again, think of our stereotypes. Think of our gender norms. If you're over 25 and you're divorced, say, 33, that plays into this 44%, right? That you may be less likely to remarry. Because in society, there's this stigma, in a sense, that if you are divorced, something is wrong, right? Something went wrong, something is wrong, right? There's a lot of blame. And so if you are a woman that has some of these extra pressures, and somebody thinks something's wrong with you or the situation that you are in, plus you are older than 25, the odds are stacked against you. Not to be a Debbie Downer, but yeah. People are more likely to marry within their race. That makes sense. We talked about that in other classes. Out of the races of people who are most likely to remarry, white women are the most likely to remarry. Right? So we have to couple that with this, right? So this is just 52% of divorced men. Right? Just men, right? And women. But here we're adding this kind of race dynamic, right? That is an important social identity that we all have. Right? All of us are, white, black, whatever we are, right? And so that's an important aspect to our identity. College-educated African-American women, so black women, college-educated black women, often have reduced prospects because if we buy into this idea that people are more likely to marry within the race, then college-educated black women have reduced prospects because college-educated black men are more likely to marry younger, to marry less educated women, and they're more likely to marry different race and ethnicities. Right? I'm not exactly sure why this may be, but that's where the numbers lie. That's where, not lie as in not tell the truth, that's where the numbers are, right? And then Asian Americans, so Asian folk, are at the lowest rates of getting remarried. And that could be a cultural thing, most likely a cultural thing, right? There's nothing biologically different with, Asian folk versus black folk versus white folk, right? Most likely, potentially a cultural thing. So now, this part of the lecture is always super interesting. Because when we talk about getting remarried, right, even just getting married in general, we often like to think that we are marrying for love. Right? That's the goal, right? Is you want to marry somebody that you love, right? But do we always marry for love? Or do we sometimes marry for status or for money? Right? So this brings up the idea of what are sugar daddies? What are sugar mommies? What are issues around these things? And I'm really, really, really bummed that we could not have this class in person, because this is always the most interesting conversation. Because many college students have a sugar daddy or a sugar mommy, or they are a quote-unquote sugar baby. Because, man, college is expensive, right? And so many people, probably people you know, have an intricate understanding because they are one of these things or they have one of these things, right? But again, what are the issues around these dynamics? Could it lead to marriage? Is it about love, or is this simply about money? Is it about status? Are you using these people? Are those people using you? Are you okay with that? Right? If they pay your bills, are you okay with having dinner with them once a week? Right? And usually this is the stereotype, that we have some older man, right, for a sugar daddy or sugar mommy, right? Some older person is with somebody romantically, whatever it is. They are with somebody much younger than them, but is it for love? Is it for status, or is it simply for money? Is it even real? Right? Again, it definitely is real. Every single class that I have taught, when it gets to this lecture, somebody in the class has had this experience where they have been a sugar baby to somebody, men and women. So I want you to watch these clips on your own time, because both of them specifically mention college-aged students, or just like college-aged people, and specifically college students, because of price of tuition and living expenses, and how many times people our age, right, traditional aged college students, are resorting to this to pay the bills. Alright, so switching gears a little bit, who is this step family, right? This mixed blended family. Alright, this is Drake and Josh. Right? Many of us grew up watching this show. We currently watch this show. I don't know. I loved this show when I was younger. Right? They had interesting characters. Of course, it was stereotypical, right? It was a sitcom, but nevertheless, this guy, right, marries her, and they mix their families together. Right? So it is a step family in a sense, to where I believe he is his stepdad and she is his stepmom. So step families can also be known as remarried families or blended families. However, there are various types of step families, and that should make total sense, right? You have the mother and stepfather family, the father and stepmother family. There's a mother and stepmother family. There's a father and stepfather family, right? There are many different kinds of step families. A complex step family, though, is both partners have children from previous relationships. So that's Drake and Josh, right? It is not that she had Drake and he just shows up. Right? He already had a child, she already had a child, and then they blended them together. Now, a joint step family is they have children from both parents, like Drake and Josh, but then they also have one child from the parents together. That's a typo, I apologize. Now, there are some differences between step families and first marriage families. First marriage families referring to, should be straightforward, but families in which the marriage that produced the children, neither person was married before. So that was their first marriage. For step families, what's interesting, is that everyone has experienced some important losses. And at first that sounds negative, but that can be incredibly positive, right? You have something to bond over, right? You have a shared experience. And sure, the shared experience is, negative, it's not fun, but nevertheless, everyone has experienced some kind of loss, And that can kind of create some shared background between folks. That can also lead to maybe you have similar conflict resolution strategies. Similar rules, similar traditions, because you have this kind of shared background. It can also be everything is completely different. As we saw in the movie, Yours, Mine, and Ours, the drill sergeant guy, right, the Navy, the admiral, military man, he had a completely different style of handling his kids than she did. And when they brought those together, it created some conflict because not everybody was on the same page. Parent-child bonds are incredibly unique because as a child in a blended family or in a step family, you will create bonds with your step parent, but they're of course going to be unique and different than your biological parent. For better or for worse, I don't know. But nevertheless, those parent-child bonds are going to be unique. Obviously, one biological parent is not physically present. If you're in a step family, you may be a member of two households, you may not be. But for many, many children who are in some kind of a step family, the other parent is still around. And therefore, they're kind of a member of two households, and they have to juggle what it's like. What are the rules and traditions in this house versus what are the rules and traditions in that house? How do they juggle and balance both of those identities? And then, similar to the parent-child bonds, the role of the step-parent is obviously going to be unique. Right? I really like the meme where I think the little kid just yells like, "You're not my dad!" Right? Like, "You're not my real dad!" And it's funny, but that's how we understand the role of the step-parent. If a man comes in and marries into a family where there is a mom and a child, for example, how does the child react to that step-parent? And we're going to chat about that in a couple slides, but nevertheless, how do they react to that step-parent? What is that step-parent's role? Friend? Hardcore, like discipline? What? Some challenges is that many of the adults face financial strain. We talked about a couple chapters ago, divorce can be incredibly expensive. So if you are going through a divorce or you are recovering from a divorce, you may have a lot of financial strain. Disciplinary boundaries can be difficult. As we just said, if you're a child bouncing between two households, and when you're at mom's house, you can just do whatever you want, and then at the other house, there are strict rules you have to follow, then you may say, "Hey, Mom, Dad does this. Why do I have to do this?" Or, "Hey, Dad, Mom lets me do whatever I want. Why can't I do that here?" Right? And those parents may have to juggle how to discipline in an appropriate way without having control over what happens when the child goes to the other home. When that child goes to the other home, obviously that's going to influence the bonding ability from the parents. Right? You can't bond with your kid if your kid's not around. So if your kid's at the other place, you can't bond with your kid. Children often face a loss of power and control, and similar to previous chapters, right, we talked about learned helplessness. That if the divorce that your parents went through was a very ugly one, it was very rough, it was very emotionally taxing, and you felt very powerless, then, that's your reality, and everyone's just saying, "Oh, that's just how it's going to be," then you may learn, "Oh, well, okay, I guess my opinion doesn't matter," or "I guess this doesn't matter," right? You almost learn to be helpless because, your parents got divorced, so, your world is falling apart. What does it all matter anyway? That may make you angry. That may lead to disruptive behavior. Based on your disruptive behavior, right, or a part of your behavior, could be having divided loyalties, right? So from the previous example, say dad's house is super strict, mom's house is very relaxed. Well, little kids, they want the relaxed, right? They want to just be able to do whatever they want, even if it's not healthy. They don't know that. They're just like, yeah, I can just play video games all day and eat hot Cheetos. Sure, sign me up. So they may actively tell dad, I want to go to mom's house. She lets me eat hot Cheetos whenever I want. All right, and that may almost bring up a sense of divided loyalties, and that may even bring up some emotional barriers with one parent or the other. Now, of course, it's, we almost always talk about the challenges, right? But there are positives as well, right? So let's talk about how things can go right. How things do work out well. For successful stepfamilies, successful as in healthy, we talk about this idea of them mourning their losses. We saw in this one that everyone has experienced some important loss. So a successful stepfamily doesn't necessarily just bury and stuff the feelings under the rug of, hey, yeah, you were a part of a different family. And that family, wasn't able to continue on for whatever reason, and that sucks. Right? Or maybe it doesn't, right? But whatever, it's not there anymore. And folks have to mourn that, have to grieve that. And if you just shove it under the rug, that may cause issues later on. So successful stepfamilies recognize that, yeah, that was an important part of somebody's life and that needs to be mourned. And because of that, they have realistic expectations. Right? No stepfamily is just going to instantly make everything work. If they do, fantastic, right? But that's not necessarily the most realistic thing in the world. It's going to take some time to work out the kinks, to get used to everything. Obviously, the parents develop strong relationships with each other, but more importantly, the parents, both biological parent and step-parent, develop strong relationships with the children. Right? If that is frayed and kind of disengaged from the get-go, that's going to cause issues down the road. But if you were able to develop a strong relationship to your new step-parent and your step-parent to you, that will lead to this cohesion of this new family. New family traditions are a way to kind of cement this idea of having a new family. Right? If you used to do this one thing every Thanksgiving with your old family, but now you don't do it anymore, that's a symbol for your lack of your old family. But if you create a new tradition that, hey, in this new family, we're going to do, we're going to go camping every Memorial Day, right? That helps cement this idea that, oh, okay, this family does this thing, right? So I guess we did that thing, so we are this new family. The step relationships form, right? Again, strong relationships. And the last thing, if it's applicable, you have to work with the non-residential parent, right? The biological parent that is not present. If they have custody, right, or if they have visitation, right, or some kind of rights to the child in some way, shape, or form, or as Governor Justice would say, some shape, form, or fashion, you still have to work with them. You can't completely cut them out of, out of everything. The child will still have a relationship with that parent, and that relationship needs to be respected. So you got to work with that person. Moving away from the idea of having a step family, but for single parent families, specifically mothers, most single parent families are births or have children, women who are single parent mothers often are having kids over, they are over the age of 20. Not that they're having children that are already 20 years old, right? Okay, so this wording is confusing, but I apologize. But nevertheless, you get it. that it's usually women who have kids, who are single mothers, are usually over 20 when they have those kids. Now you could say, oh, well, what about like teen mom and all that stuff, right? Those, I would say, are the rarities, right? Usually if somebody is under 20 and they're having a child, they've most likely married to that person, whether it's 17 or 18 years old or whatever, they've still most likely married to that person, or at least that's what the data shows us. Oftentimes, though, those women live in unhealthy environments, right? That can be, various things. Just the housing isn't good, or they live with somebody that they're not very, they live with somebody else who isn't very healthy to them, right? They're more likely to be in poverty. And again, this makes sense because if you are 21 years old, which many of you in this class are around that age, again, think about where your financial status is right now, let alone if you had a child to take care of. That doesn't leave you much money for saving and for investing, right? Whatever. You're spending it on your kid, and so therefore you may be likely to be in poverty. We do have to remember that there is a distinction between being a widow versus being divorced, right? A lot of times, although I spent the first 13 years of my life having both my mom and my dad, after my dad passed away when I was 13, I didn't really think of I didn't think of myself as having both parents, right? I thought about, I come from a single parent family. Because for, the next 7-8 years, obviously to now, it's just been my mom. During a lot of those crucial teenage years for me, it was just my mom. So there are times where I think I did have both parents. But then there are other times where I forget almost and think I just come from a single parent family. Right, so it's important to remember that distinction, that you can have widows as single parents, but also divorced mothers as single parents. And then the involvement of the father in single parent families who are, the child is with the mother, involvement of that father varies by a lot of different things. Socioeconomic status, ability, right? Are they physically able to be involved? We do see different numbers based on race and ethnicity about who is involved. And that isn't necessarily a race thing, but it could be race plus ability plus SES. And that's what it always is, right? You can't just say, this person did this thing because of one thing. It's always one thing plus 1.5 million other things, right? So the involvement of the father varies by all of these things combined. For single parent family fathers, right, we are still doing a lot of research out there about what this really kind of looks like. Historically, when we think of single families, like single parent families, we think of mothers, right? But fathers are out there. I think the movie Pursuit of Happiness is a great example. Well, I should say great example, but that is an example of a single parent father. Sort of. Yeah, If you've seen the movie, you get what I mean. So you have single versus married. So as just fathers in general. So single fathers spend more on out-of-home food, alcohol, and tobacco compared to married fathers. Why might this be? This isn't to make it seem like single fathers are, bad people. But if you are a married father who you say you're a married father who is working, and you have 2 kids at home, and your partner is at home, then the majority of the money that you earn by working is probably paying for your rent or your mortgage or groceries or your kid's baseball practice or your partner's pottery class or whatever it is, right? That's probably where your money is going. But if you're a single father and you just have your kid, you don't have those other folks to be responsible to, then you may have the ability to spend your money on other things. However, the data does show us that single fathers have less education. Single fathers earn less money on average. However, that gap is increasing. And to make sense of both these things, I want you to really look back and think back to previous chapters of not only what do we know about being a single parent and what that may look like, but why or who's most likely to get married in the first place. Right? So, because these single fathers may not be divorced single fathers, right? They may be single fathers who something happened with the biological mother, right? And now they are a single father, right? So be thinking of all these different social dynamics and social institutions that can play into why these things may be. For child custody, who's more likely to have custody of sons than daughters? Who is more likely to have custody of sons than daughters? This can be tricky because overall, women are more likely to receive custody of their children. Just in general, women are more likely to receive custody over their children. However, there is still this interesting cultural idea that men, if they are given custody, are more likely to have custody over their sons than their daughters. Because of this father-son, mother-daughter dynamic we see culturally, that with the same-sex gender or same-gender parent as the child, that there's something kind of inherently more valuable there than father-daughter, mother-son. Right? So I don't buy any of those justifications, but nevertheless, culturally, that is what we see, that men are more likely to have custody over their sons than their daughters. Challenges for single-parent families. I mean, it's kind of everything, right? If you're a single-parent family and you have a child you're trying to take care of, you're going to probably run into more challenges everywhere than you would if you were a married couple. Right? Your children, when they go to school, when they go to work, right? School is going to be tough because, again, if we've talked about this in previous chapters, that their schooling may be affected because they're going through divorce. Right? Or maybe they're after divorce and now the kid has to bounce between homes. So who picks up when? Where am I going to? Is this dad's weekend? Is this mom's weekend? Right? Where am I going? And if the child is living in a stressful time like that, that's going to affect their school and how they do at school. Maybe the child is even asked to work because the job that mom or dad has isn't enough to pay the bills. So maybe at 16, 17, whatever, the child is asked to get a part-time job to help make ends meet. It's very possible. We've talked about this in previous chapters, that many times, right, kids who have experienced a divorce, so their parents got divorced, they are more likely to experience pregnancy at a young age. And that's going to affect, obviously, their lifestyle. For parents, they have to figure out, okay, how do I co-parent with a parent who isn't around? Right? Are we super strict? Are we not super strict? What if I'm super strict but they're not? They allow little Jimmy to play video games at 2 a.m. I'm saying Jimmy's got to go to bed, right? How do we co-parent when that parent isn't around? Kids cost money, right? The kid wants to go on the field trip. Who's paying for that? Is it based on the weekend? right? Or this is mom's week, so mom pays for this thing. It's dad's week, so dad pays for that thing. Or do they split everything 50-50? How do they handle money? And then, of course, the lifestyle of just juggling all of that combined. All right, so that's it. Pretty short in comparison to a lot of other things. So, as always, send me your questions, your comments, your concerns. Be reaching out to people if you have not done so for that career day email and for those sources. Be doing the last thought paper and, of course, your career day paper. Remember, no presentation, right? We're not doing a presentation because no one wants to put up with that on an online format like this. So just do those papers, that one last quiz. Check out these lectures whenever you can, or if that is convenient for you. Read your book, and yeah. Thanks, folks. Keep washing your hands. Stay safe. Hopefully this will be all over soon. Probably won't, but nevertheless, hey, you can hope, right? Take it easy, guys.